This is Relationscapes. We're mapping out the stories and ideas that shape who we are and how we connect with each other. I'm Blair Hodges, introducing our guides in this episode, Cara Natterson and Vanessa Kroll Bennett.
The main question is, how do you connect with a kid who feels far away? That's the larger question. It might be about puberty, but it might be about academics or friendships. And you're trying desperately to reach that kid, and you feel like what you say or how you say it just makes them move further and further away from you.
Puberty's awkward, but talking about it doesn't have to be. The real challenge is figuring out how to have these conversations in a way that brings us closer instead of pushing kids further away. And that's a tough needle to thread. That's why I was so relieved to discover the work of Cara Natterson and Vanessa Kroll Bennett, co-authors of This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained. This medical doctor joined forces with that educator to break down why these conversations feel so tough and how to navigate them with confidence, humor, and connection. Not to mention the best science-based updates on what puberty is all about. A lot has changed since we were young, so how can we share the latest information to empower kids without being cringe? And what do we do if we hit a brick wall? We're talking about it right now. Dr. Cara Natterson, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here.
We're also joined by Vanessa Kroll Bennett. Vanessa, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited to talk to you all about puberty, and you've written a book about puberty, right? You host a podcast about puberty. So people might assume that both of you feel really comfortable talking about it, and maybe even kind of like weirdly so, like, wow, they really got this puberty thing going on. But I got the impression from the book, actually, that these conversations can still be awkward even for you all. You're specialists in this, and there can be some awkwardness there. For example, I mean, you don't have the fondest memories of puberty yourselves. So, Cara, why don't we start with you and talk about how you feel talking about puberty?
You know, I'm a pediatrician, so when I put my clinical hat on, I feel super comfortable, right? I can tell you things about your body or the way things work inside of organs or inside of cells, and I make it totally not about me and not about you, and that feels super comfortable. Then for decades, I went home and parented my own children as infants, as toddlers, all the way through puberty. And I mean, what do they say about the cobbler, right? So my poor children. When we take off our work hats, Vanessa and I become regular people who are experiencing all the same things that other trusted adults are experiencing with their kids. And so much of that is rooted in the fact that we have our own puberty baggage. We went through this stage of life ourselves. Everyone did. And it's very hard, even though this is what we preach to everyone, it's very hard to divorce your own experience from your kids. And it can make it messy and uncomfortable and awkward. And I don't want to say, Vanessa, I mess it up all the time. My kids are now out of the house. They are both college students. I continue to mess it up. But what I've gotten really good at, thanks to being in this field, is acknowledging when I've messed up and then telling my kids, hey, I got to do that again. I'm going to take the do-over. This is the information I know that I'm going to impart to you, but how I imparted it to you was a mess. So let me try again.
What about you, Vanessa? So, I mean, Cara's got the pediatrician background. How did you come into this space and decide to kind of focus on this?
I'm not a pediatrician, Blair. Although Cara has conferred upon me an honorary medical degree from the Medical School of Natterson.
That's true.
I worked for a decade with girls using sports classes that were infused with social emotional learning to build girl self-esteem. So I created it when my daughter was 3, and I realized I live in New York City, and I couldn't find a sports class for my daughter that was fun, that taught her all different sports skills, and that supported her full identity as a creative, joyful kid who loved to draw and sing and dance and also run around with a ball. And so I created it because the research shows us that girls' self-esteem peaks at age 9 and then declines through the tween and teen years. And right now, it's never to return to its pre-9-year-old levels, which was so devastating to me that I wanted to do something about it. And pretty early on in coaching these girls, I noticed they were all, or many of them were in puberty earlier than I expected. So the 2nd and 3rd grade girls in my classes were in puberty. And I thought, well, if I'm trying to not have them, lose their self-esteem, then talking to them about puberty and also talking to their adults about their puberty is a super important way. So I started running workshops in New York and LA. I got connected to Cara. And ever since then, we then sort of launched this whole 360 world of puberty podcast, book, everything. And I grew up in a house where talking about puberty and sex and all of those things was actually like totally fine. It wasn't uncomfortable. It didn't feel awkward for me. And so I am definitely an imperfect parent. Like Cara and I laugh about the term parenting expert because like truly no one in the entire universe is a parenting expert.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with puberty. You can't be a puberty expert. You can be an expert in the science of puberty or how puberty has evolved and changed over generations. But it's ever, ever, ever evolving because it involves human beings. And so I just thought, well, if I can create something that educates people and empowers people, and if I'm willing to take on the conversations that other people don't feel so comfortable taking them on, then maybe I'll spread a little reassurance in the process.
I thought you were going to say joy.
Joy.
You're just going to spread reassurance.
Hopefully I'll spread joy, but I'll take reassurance.
She's a bundle of joy every day. That is not a joke. Joy in a human.
Well, and I think there's joy in your whole approach. And nothing says joy like an excellent pun. So I'm just going to pitch a new tagline for you. How about something like puberty, the time to learn all about puberty? What do you think?
Blair, come sit by me. This is going to go great.
Two punsters. Actually, it's funny because friends of ours, Melissa Holmes and Trish Hutchinson, who are 2 physicians, wrote a really lovely kids book about puberty called Youology.
Yeah.
They're founders of a company called Girlology, but it is a non-gendered, inclusive of race and developmental abilities and all of those things. It's a wonderful book. And it is called Youology, and they're totally awesome. So I will let the 2 punsters that I'm sitting with play out that concept, but I will recuse myself from commenting.
Okay. You mentioned something really important too, Vanessa. You talked about how puberty, you noticed it was starting much earlier. And that wasn't just you. That wasn't just anecdotal. The data actually backs that up. Puberty's starting earlier and stretching out longer than before. So to help people understand how that works, maybe define what puberty is. What are you saying puberty consists of and how it's starting earlier and stretching longer?
So it's really interesting. I mean, when we keynote, we start with, Cara puts up a slide of Mel Brooks, the history of the world, but instead of world, it says the history of puberty. And depending on where we are in the country, it gets a bigger or smaller laugh. But puberty has changed dramatically over the last few decades. And on average, it now starts between 8 and 9 for girls and between 9 and 10 for boys, and it doesn't happen faster. In fact, it happens slower. So a first period is a middle marker of puberty, and that's not happening much earlier for girls, which means that they're in puberty for potentially 3 to 4 years before they get their first period. And then there's lots of puberty and development after the first period. So it now lasts almost a decade.
Yeah.
As opposed to the 3 to 4 year sprint that we think of from our growing up as puberty.
And I'll just jump in and say there is a very narrow definition of puberty, which is the sexual maturation of an individual. You go from I cannot be part of a baby-making equation to I can potentially be part of a baby-making equation. I use those words very intentionally because some people might not choose to, or some people might have other downstream issues that make it hard to be part of that process. But the reproductive organs mature, right? And once they are fully mature, you have reached the end of puberty. That's the narrow definition. What's the broad definition? The broad definition is all those sex hormones, namely LH and FSH made in the brain, and estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone made in the body, all made in all bodies, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Those sex hormones impact the way the brain thinks and feels. And so what we used to call adolescence, which was really the emotional experience of all of this, and we separated from puberty, which was more the physical experience, we now recognize is really one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
That so much of the way that the brain is responding to the world around it has to do with this swell of hormones rising and falling in and around the brain. So semantics have changed. Puberty itself has stretched, and what we call puberty has changed.
That's really helpful because it's more than just groins and breasts or like pubic hair or something. And you mentioned having a period is not the beginning of puberty for people who have periods. And it's basically adolescence. And you also take a second to say, people might ask, well, why is it happening earlier? Are there environmental factors? Are there genetic factors? What's happening? And you point out that the research is pretty unclear on it. We don't have solid answers on that. So I don't want to spend a ton of time there, only to point out people are looking into that. There's studies being done. We don't really have, is that right, Cara? We don't have the clearest answers on that?
Yes, and a quick side note that there are really 3 buckets of drivers that are being studied most aggressively.
Okay.
And these are all looking like they impact the earlier shift in sex hormones in the body. The first one is a whole bunch of endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are chemicals that change the way hormones rise and fall and work inside the body. There are 1,000 of them. And there was just a study a few months ago that looked at one called musk amberette. That was the first one that was directly connected to earlier onset of puberty. So there's endocrine disrupting hormones that will definitely in 5 or 10 years be part of the definitive answer.
Are we getting that in our Mountain Dew or something? Or is it like, where is that environment?
No, in cosmetics.
Oh,
Yes.
interesting.
It's
Okay.
it's a cheap way to put fragrance. It's like a chemical version of musk.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's a cheap way of putting fragrance into cosmetics. And so it's been literally shown to cause GnRH to tell the pituitary gland to send LH
get
and
going.
FSH
Yeah.
down to
Okay.
the gonads. And it's already been banned in Europe, but it's still legal
Okay.
in the United States.
And then what are the other 2 buckets, Cara, you were
Yeah,
mentioning?
the second bucket is antibiotics, not the antibiotics you get for strep throat or an ear infection, but antibiotics that are given to poultry and cattle that wind up in our food chain, and they do impact the agricultural produce in and around them as well, because those animals are getting a lot of antibiotics and then shedding a lot of these microorganisms that have been exposed to and might be resistant to antibiotics. The science there is pretty messy, but basically antibiotic exposure in these feed animals then causes inflammation in the gut, which seems to trigger puberty a little bit earlier. I'm very eager to understand the science better, and I think that we'll see a lot more come out soon. And then the biggest and almost, I'd say, most prescient bucket is the stress bucket. That cortisol, the stress hormone, looks to tip bodies into puberty both directly and indirectly. Again, unclear which is conferring the most impact, but cortisol does act on the brain and does shift the way that LH and FSH are released. It also works on what we call the periphery, the rest of the body, and changes the way that sex hormones behave. It can actually flip pre-testosterone hormones into active testosterone. I mean, it's really very interesting science that boils down to our kids are growing up in a really stressful world, and that is probably part of what's tipping them into puberty.
So as people can tell, that it can be kind of complicated. And I just want to throw this in here as an aside. I don't really want to spend much time on it, but I do want to say there are a lot of people out there on social media that want to tell us what's happening and identify these really easy, simple reasons why stuff's happening. Like, oh, it's seed oils, or, oh, it's this, and like, here's this supplement, you know? So I just want to remind people that it's really important to listen to specialists on these issues, to take our time, to maybe be skeptical about the easy answers that are connected to moneyed interests and to be careful about the voices that we're listening to, because we all see this happening, but then you've got kind of hucksters out there ready to sell some product based on it.
I mean, we would love an easy answer.
Yeah.
If there was one, Vanessa, right? Wouldn't we just fix one thing?
And the danger is not only for us, but it's for kids who are consuming social media and seeing the quote easy answer or the magic bullet or the simplified or inaccurate science. So that's another reason, and there are 4 million reasons, but that's another reason to be in conversation with kids about this stuff, not just to ingest the information ourselves, but to be in dialogue with them.
Yeah. The big takeaway from this beginning of your book is that you invite us to treat kids according to their age, not according to their appearance, because we can be misled. These kids might be sprouting up, getting big, looking more mature than what we realize they are. And so you really remind adults to remember that these are kids, regardless of what they look like.
Yeah, I mean, we can all remember that one kid in our class who looked, 5 years older than everybody else, was inches taller, maybe had a full beard, full muscles, or, a full pair of breasts, whatever it was, they looked much older. And now that can be, half a classroom. Kids look that way. And there's a few concerns about that, Blair. I mean, thank God for educators, because teachers who've been doing this a while know that, as we like to say, they look at their 6th grade classroom and it's like a Star Wars bar, right? You've got kids of every shape and size and stage of development. And educators know, hey, these are all still 6th graders. They're going to pack their backpacks like 6th graders. They're going to deal with conflict like 6th graders.
Yeah.
They're going to forget their homework like 6th graders. But the people out in the world who are not trained professionals, either mental health professionals or educators or pediatricians, don't realize that. It puts kids at risk if they are treated as the age they appear and not the age they are. And it puts older kids at risk because they are exposed to things that are not age appropriate, whether it be substances or comments or behaviors, people assuming they're older. It's also really detrimental to kids who look much younger than they actually are. The late bloomers who may look 8 but are actually 11 or 12. It's incredibly demeaning for those kids as well, who have the cognitive abilities of all of their peers at 11 or 12 but just look little. And it's pretty humiliating when they get treated like a 3rd grader and not a 6th grader.
This also tends to fall disproportionately on people of color, especially Black kids are often treated differently because they're viewed differently or expected to be more aggressive, or, there are studies that show they receive different penalties and harsher penalties in schools, or they're more often suspended for the same kinds of behaviors. So it's not just with age, but also we really need to take into account race and all these other factors about how we're judging kids.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of research about how Black girls are sexualized at earlier ages, and the data about earlier puberty, Black girls, based on the data, are first to puberty. They are the earliest bloomers when we divide kids, and there's a few different studies, and they look at racial differences. And Black boys are also, the data tells us, develop earlier on average than their white counterparts. So there's that layered with the systemic racism that puts Black children more likely to receive punishments more severe than their white peers in school settings. So it's the sexualization and coupled with, just inherent racism that makes it really concerning. And they are developing earlier. So it puts them at greater risk at earlier ages.
Although it bears saying that there are a lot of researchers who are looking at, is it genetic why they're going through puberty earlier? Or is it going to turn out to be a function of zip code, which is really socioeconomic?
Yeah. What food are they eating? What
Correct.
can they afford? Yeah.
Right. Systemic racism and socioeconomic differentials in this country are really going to turn out, I think, to be the answer. And I say that because Louise Greenspan, who is one of the lead researchers in this field and wrote a book called The New Puberty, she's incredible. She says so. And if Louise says so, then I say so.
Okay, good. We're talking with Cara Natterson and Vanessa Kroll Bennett about This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained. Okay, I want to do a little game now. So, Vanessa, I'm going to have you describe just quickly the first conversation you had with your oldest child about sex. And they were like 10 years old. So just give us the basics about what happened, and then we're going to have Cara break down how you screwed it up.
Oh, boy.
You just made her day, Blair. So the first time I talked to my eldest child, he was 10. First conversation we had about sex, he was reading the newspaper. Those were in the days when people actually read a physical newspaper. And there was an article in the sports section about an athlete being accused of rape. And he looked up and he said, "Mom, what's rape?" And I was like getting breakfast ready for 4 children and running around like crazy. And I said, "Oh, rape is when a man forces a woman to have sex." And then I finished getting ready and I like took him to the billion of activities that day. And then literally hours later, I was like, oh my God, I messed up that answer in so many ways. So the first thing I said to him was, and I don't know if you want me to go this far or you want Cara
this
to
is where I want Cara.
deconstruct.
I want Cara to point out what happened here.
So Cara, share all the ways I blew this first
No,
conversation.
And go hard. Don't be gentle.
Okay, guys, sorry. I'm a glasses half full person.
It's true.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with the fact that Vanessa took a do-over.
Okay, yeah.
That's the most important. She started with hours later. And what was going to follow is hours later, it was still roiling through her brain. And it was actually dawning on her. You know when you've got like a seed between your teeth, but you've got that thing in your brain where the seed is like slowly working its way out. And then 5 hours later, you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. That was what Vanessa did. And then she didn't shove that down. She took a do-over.
Yeah.
And she said, "Hey, buddy," literally, she said, "Hey, buddy. Hey, buddy, I realize I messed this up. I gave you an answer. I didn't ask you questions about what you knew and didn't know. I didn't define my terms," right? So out of all the wrong came so much more right in that scenario that it's the perfect story to empower any parent or trusted adult. Like, you really can't mess this up because even in your mess up, trauma seals, right? That trauma of the bad description from Vanessa opened up. And by the way, it did not seal in her kid's brain. I've talked to him about it. He's like, whatever. What? It was much more traumatic for my mom. But
he's like, I just was hoping that player would still, or like, I didn't want to lose my fantasy football.
Exactly.
Totally. I mean, I used to have this thing, Blair, where I used to ask kids when I was practicing medicine, I would say, have your parents ever talked to you about sex when I was in the exam room doing the one-on-one thing? And, many would say, oh, no, never. And then they'd be getting dressed or doing whatever, and I'd be in my office and I'd talk to the parent and I'd say, have you ever talked to your kid about sex? And they could describe exactly where they were, how long the conversation was, what it covered. It just goes to show what lands for us and traumatizes us does not land for them and traumatize them. But Vanessa took the do-over and she repaired. And I can tell you, as someone who has sat at her dinner table many, many times, she has such a beautiful way of opening up conversations. And I actually think, Vanessa, it might date back to that moment for you.
It probably does. I mean, Blair, I basically turned him in the back seat and was like, hey, I realized I had never defined sex. Like, it was the first time we talked about sex. I was like, do you know what sex means? And he was like, not really. And I was like, oh my God. Okay. We'll start there.
And you say you gendered it too, how you made it about, it's when a man does this.
Then I gendered, then once we got through sex, and I still remember this, we had parked and the trunk was open and he's still in his seat and I'm getting stuff out of the trunk. And he goes, well, but can a woman rape a man? And that's when it hit me. Not only had I not defined sex, I had gendered rape or assault, which was a total screw up also. I mean, there were many, many screw ups along the way of my conversation. And so then we had a conversation. Yes, of course, anybody can assault anybody and rape is not gendered. And then he'd had enough. And then he was like, okay.
And I was done.
Yeah, you say you got to pick up the signals because sometimes the kids are going to be like, okay.
Right. And if I had fallen on my sword and been like, oh my God, I'm such a terrible parent. I'm so sorry. I've ruined your understanding of intimacy and love and sex forever and ever. And you'll never forgive me. I know you'll never forgive. If I had done that, then maybe the trauma would be sealed in his brain. But he was like, great. Thank you so much. And then we we moved on.
Well, I liked your advice, too, to ask why they were asking, to wonder,
Yes.
like, oh, hey, where'd that come from? Because then you can kind of get the context for it. That was
That's
great
right.
advice.
Well, and that stems from a colleague of ours whose son asked her, how was I made? And she was like,
Yeah.
rubbed her hands together and was like, here we go. And she was so excited to tell the story. And then she's like, about reproduction and like all of the amazing parts of sex and love. And then she like pauses in the middle and she's like, wait a second, what made you ask that question? And he goes, well, he pointed to their golden retriever and was like, well, I mean, he's my brother, and I'm wondering, like, how you made him versus how you made me. And she was like, oh, my God, I totally messed up finding out what the starting point is. Because it's, pretty different answer if it's about your dog and how they got there.
Yeah. So the tips that you give are great. Again, you're inviting people to listen first, to breathe and slow down. Don't let your baggage take over, to give your kids space as they need it. Leave the door open for later conversations. Try to avoid sounding like a lecture. There's so many good tips in here. And like you said, if people are feeling nervous about keeping all that straight, there's always an opportunity to repair. So we don't have to be perfect at the first opportunity.
Correct.
All right, let's talk about some of the specifics about puberty now that we kind of have a bigger picture about how to talk about it. We can talk about some of the things that get talked about. And Cara, you decided to start out with breasts. This was the first chapter that gets specific, and I wondered why you decided to begin there.
Well, I mean, in part because breasts, which we often call boobs, because that's what the kids call them. So, and it's neither is a bad word and neither is sort of an ineffective word. Some anatomy words get muddy and murky. This one, totally fair to use the two as synonyms. But they're the first things to show up. That's why we started the book there, because actually, again, to quote Louise Greenspan, really the first sign of puberty is a slamming door. But if you're taking moods off the table and you're looking for the physical shifts, by far the most common one is breast development. And breast development impacts girls for obvious reasons, but it also impacts about 50% of male bodies. About 50% of males have some degree of breast development on one side or both at some point during puberty.
Yeah, and you invite us to normalize difference, to talk to our kids about differences. And I mean, kids can look around and see that there are differences, so that can be helpful. I also like the practical advice, for example, about buying some sort of bra or a training bra or whatever, where some kids are not going to be into this or feel really bad about it. And I think there was advice to like maybe buy a couple and just kind of leave them someplace. Like, okay, I'm just going to like leave these over here, whatever. Like, you don't have to be like, okay, we need to try this on and we're going to do this today. And you're really trying to give kids space.
I mean, that's the goal. I would argue that you know the kid in your life best.
Yeah.
So try it the way that it feels like it would work best for them as opposed to for you, right? But let's go back to the Vanessa sex story. Many will mess it up. You casually leave a bra on a bed. Oh boy, will some people get read the riot act for that move. Okay. There's an opportunity for repair. Repair allows conversation. Let's talk about bras, right? There are lots and lots of ways to do this. But really the biggest question we get about breast development and bras is, do we really even need this? Is this, there are lots of people who wonder. And the answer is, that's another great conversation because there are a lot of reasons why parents might think their kids want or need a bra, but there are a lot of kids have a lot of feelings about this topic. So like everything else in the book, Blair, unfortunately, there's no one and done. This is like dozens and dozens of conversation starters over a long period of time.
Well, let's talk about periods then. If people are thinking that like talking about breasts is difficult, periods are a whole other thing. And you talk about how a lot of people who've had periods, they feel a lot of shame or humiliation around like their first period or trying to come to terms with what it means, which is pretty wild because about half the Earth's population menstruates. So it's such a common thing with so much stigma and shame around it. And I know some kiddos who don't want to talk about it at all.
Right.
What do you suggest in that kind of a situation where a kid just doesn't even want to begin the conversation?
It's an interesting question because some people would say, just leave them be, right? Don't force it. Except for the health and safety of that kid, there is information they really need from someone.
Mm-hmm.
And that someone doesn't have to be you. It could be, an older sibling, a camp counselor, a guidance counselor at school, a health teacher, a grandparent. It could be a lot of different people. But the main question is, how do you connect with a kid who feels far away? That's the larger question. And it's true of whether it might be about puberty, but it might be about academics or friendships or extracurriculars, and you're trying desperately to reach that kid and you feel like you just cannot reach them, or what you say or how you say it just makes them move further and further away from you. And we interviewed Wendy Mogul a few years ago, and she's a wonderful psychologist and writer, and she talks about being enchanted with their enchantment, that kids have interests. Kids are passionate about stuff. And so if you want to create connection with them, connect with them over their interests to begin with. And then once you've opened the door to conversation, to connection, then you can try some other topics, right? So you can start out by talking about Fortnite or fantasy football or YouTube makeup tutorials, and then you can move to, hey, what's going on in your classes right now? Or how is band practice? Those kinds of things. So that's one piece of advice we give. The second piece of advice we give is some information is critical and it has to be imparted to that child. And we go into these conversations hoping there's going to be this kumbaya moment. It's like, Blair, let's talk for 4 hours about this topic. And the kids are like, no way, no how, go away. But if we say to a kid, listen, I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. I have to tell you 3 things about your changing body that's really important right now. Give me 5 minutes. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. And then when I'm done, you can go back to playing basketball or, doing your drawing. But give me 5 minutes. And then they know there's no pressure on them. There's a time limit. You're not lecturing them. They don't actually have to know anything. They can literally just be the recipients of the information. And here's the thing. Parents then say to their kids, do you have any questions? And if the kid doesn't have any questions or doesn't say anything in response, parents feel like they failed. They weren't listening. It didn't get in. I give up. When really, sometimes kids come back a day later, a week later, a month later, and will say things like, hey, you know what? When we were talking about that thing, here's what I don't understand. And you're like, oh my God, they were listening. I can't believe they were listening. So don't lose hope if it doesn't become a dialogue. If it feels a little bit like a monologue, keep it short, keep it tight, but still give them the information they need.
I also really liked, again, practical advice in this chapter where you talk about helping kids learn the logistics of having a period. Because as a guy who I've never had a period, this is not part of my world other than I'm very familiar with it because of my wife, but I didn't know much of anything about what kids are going through. And so you suggest having a period kit, something they can keep in their locker that's like maybe an extra change of clothes or some tampons or pads or whatever so that they don't get trapped someplace. And, I've heard really sad and scary stories about embarrassing things that happen. And so, I like the practical advice. And then we haven't covered at all the actual mechanics of a period, and the book does. So if people like me, it was very helpful to get to know more about that stuff. So people are going to be getting the actual sort of scientific explanation in a very easy to understand way. They're going to get advice about how to talk about it, and then some logistical advice. And every one of your chapters has these points in it. It's what makes the book so helpful to me. But I want to talk about hygiene right now, because this is one where I really screwed up with my own kiddo. The feet smell just got me so bad, right? And I just responded with disgust, and we're in the car on a trip, and I'm just like, oh, put your shoes back on, blah, blah, and my wife is kind of looking at me like, shut up, what are you doing? And me, I'm just being an idiot. And So later on, she pulls me aside and this is like, okay, so here's why what you did wasn't cool at all. And then in your book, I see, okay, well, at least I'm not alone in like making that kind of a mistake. But it's not good.
Oh, no,
You got to be
Blair,
careful
you
with
are
it.
not
Okay,
alone.
good.
Okay, I'm going to make you laugh for a second. We have a business where we have consumer products that make puberty a little bit more comfortable. We sell bras and we sell shorts that are super airy, and we sell socks that do not smell. And the origin story of those socks was the same.
Yeah.
I was driving a carpool of boys home from a soccer practice, and it was raining. And I literally thought I might lose consciousness
Yeah, I
in
thought
this
I was
car.
gagging. Yeah.
I thought I was, yes, I'm not going to
Yeah.
be dramatic and say I thought I would die, but I really actually thought I might pass out. And then, right, who knows where the car goes? So I put all the windows down and it's pouring. And the kids are like, Cara, don't you know that it's raining outside? And it took everything in me not to say, put your shoes back on. But that was the origin story of the socks. Hygiene. I just want to circle back for a second to your comments about periods, just to say,
Sure.
I believe that just like the hygiene conversation, which we're about to have, the period conversation too is for everyone. This is a tougher sell. It's a tougher sell. I preach it, but did I put pads in my own son's backpack and say, be an ally and be there for anyone? I did not, because given my dynamic with him at that particular age, those pads would have simply been removed immediately, and I understood the limitation there.
Or like stuck to the wall or something like at school.
With an aggressive message written on it.
Yeah.
Yes. But I do think that if we bring everyone under the umbrella of information, whether it's about something that's going to happen to your body or something that's going to happen to someone else's body, we empower everyone. And, I love that you talk about learning about these things that don't personally impact you, but they personally impact you, right? And likewise, when we talk about hygiene has nothing to do with your gender at all. They all get ripe during puberty. There's a very real reason why and the science is explained in the book in great detail, but ultimately, it has to do with certain sweat glands in certain spots on the body producing thicker, greasier, more protein-rich sweat. And then the bacteria on the body
Loves it.
eating that sweat. And as Vanessa loves to say in front of large audiences, and it wins her, like everyone in the room is like, Vanessa's my favorite person. The bacteria eat the proteins, and then what do? They
poop it out.
They poop and fart it out. And it's really the farting. It's really the
Okay.
off-gassing
I should have
of
remembered
the
that.
protein
Yes.
that presents this amazing smell that we recognize as body odor. And some kids have more of it, and some kids have less of it, and some adults have more of it, and some adults have less of it. But it is a phenomena that is universal among humans, and it is solvable. And it is solvable with this incredible thing called soap.
Yes.
You can physically wash the bacteria off your body, and they
Talk to your kids about it.
Right.
Give them some soap. By the way, whose idea was it to do the scratch and sniff BO on that chapter? That was a really cool.
That was your idea, Blair.
Oh, okay.
It was brilliant. But I will say, for those who think, what, this is such like a JV topic, it's really not. Actually, there's a lot of data that shows that good hygiene changes social interactions. It changes one's hireability. It changes one's trajectory in the world, whether it's at school or in the outside world. Like the way one presents themselves, the way they look, and the way they smell changes the way other people interact with them. That's a very big deal.
Yeah. And you almost said them smells, which I thought
That
was
smells.
cool.
I did.
Oh my God.
Don't edit that out.
The two punners. But Blair, here's the thing. I mean, the other thing about hygiene is that people don't have to use the word penis or vulva or vagina to be in conversation with their kids about hygiene. And so in some ways, it's a great training ground to have other conversations with kids about their changing bodies. And stuff like BO can sometimes show up before any other signs of development because it's actually part of adrenarche, not puberty. Technically, it's a different physiological process, which means you can have a kid with body odor and no other physical development. And you can start talking about changing bodies and how to take care of your body and what to notice about your body and how to go to people with questions about your body before it's ever about menstruation or wet dreams or erections. And so it often feels safer for people to have those conversations with kids, easier, less complicated than it does to have some of the other conversations about puberty.
Well, there's great advice, again, in the book about how to talk about that stuff. And to Cara's point earlier about talking to boys about periods and stuff, that's awesome. And also to point out, you all point out in the chapter on penises and testicles, that sometimes people think, oh, these boys are just becoming these raging horn dogs who are just like, oh, if we bring this up, it's going to unleash the beast or something, or like, but you talk about how boys really do want to know about their bodies. Like it's unfair to boys to exclude them from conversations about periods and about what women's and other people's bodies are going through. But it's also unfair to shortchange them about their own. And so you really want us to think about both those things.
Blair, you would be amazed when we meet with, because we'll talk to auditoriums of 200-300 middle schoolers or high schoolers. And if we have time, we'll talk about the physical changes of puberty, not just some of the other things like mood swings and brain development. And when we bring up the changes, when we talk about periods, the room is silent, right? Everyone is totally serious. When we talk about erections or wet dreams, everybody starts giggling. And then we'll say to the kids, hey, the reason we talk about things like erections and wet dreams is because our culture treats them like they're a punchline, like they're a joke. But they're not a joke. I mean, it's great to laugh sometimes, but they're real physical experiences that people with penises have. And those people get to know about their changing bodies, both in fun ways and in serious ways, and to understand the science of their changing bodies. And the room goes silent. It is like all of a sudden these boys there have been words put to the experience they've been having, which is like, oh, my body, my changes only get to be a joke and don't get to be treated with the same seriousness as girls' changes. It's so powerful, and it's like my favorite part when we talk to kids
It is
that
your
age.
favorite part.
It is my favorite part.
Speaking of silence, you also talk about how sometimes silence is the best option, especially when it comes to talking to kids about their bodies and their size, because kids gain weight, there's new curves, and there's differences. And one of the most important points of the book is what we shouldn't say about things about people's bodies, because you say this is when body image and eating disorder issues really set in very easily during this time. And this happens with people of all gender identities, not just girls.
Yeah, I mean, it's super important at the outset to recognize that kids of all genders struggle with body image. It might look different. So boys might be worried more about musculature, size, getting jacked, getting amped, right? They feel all this pressure to follow this one bodily ideal for males, whereas when we think about body image pressures for girls, it's more about thinness. Although there's, thank you to the Kardashians and other influencers, there are a variety of also unrealistic bodily ideals out there. But so part of it is like we want to remove the focus on the body and move the focus to kids as a human being while still being able to be in conversation with them about changing bodies, about questions they have, about the unpredictability. You know, so much of it for kids is like, but when is it going to happen? And the problem
is it normal, right? The
or
big one is like,
normal?
am I normal?
Right.
Yeah.
And there's no normal. I mean, Cara came up with, you won't be surprised to learn this, Blair, but Cara came up with this. We were working on our deck when we went out with the book, and we were like, I was saying, like, there's no one normal, right? There's many, many normals, or as we say, typical. And then Cara goes, yes, and there's no one normal. And I was like, oh my God. And
Isn't that amazing?
And
It is.
I was like, yes. And you have to imagine that made its way into many, many keynotes. And so they have all these worries. And for us to layer onto them concerns about weight gain or shape, or people forget that kids who are very thin, some kids grow up really quickly and don't gain much weight at all. The world is saying to them, oh, aren't you lucky? Oh, I wish I had your body. When the kid is like, I don't like this body. I'm not happy with this body. I want to know when it's going to change. So we just like to avoid projecting or commenting while still making ourselves available for all the questions and making sure that kids are moving their bodies enough. It's really, really, really important for their mental and physical health that kids are getting enough exercise, whatever that is, walking the dog, doing a Zumba class, yoga with friends, playing sports, whatever it is. But it's super important for all of their wellness that kids are moving their bodies enough.
I mean, I think it bears saying that kids, especially teenagers, but also tweens, are very savvy to this, you're so beautiful response to how do I look?
Yeah.
Vanessa talks really beautifully about this. I can't even do it justice. She does such a good job of helping parents to understand that is not just a disingenuous answer, but essentially it equates beauty with something. This isn't a conversation about how we feel about how they look. This is a conversation about how they feel. And we have to honor when the world is sending them all of these conflicting messages, as Vanessa has described, or a lot of messages in one singular direction. We have to honor that in a developing brain, that's a lot to handle. And in a developing brain with increasing independence, and you're starting to make all your own decisions about what you consume at lunch at school and at friends' houses, and sometimes when you're out to dinner, there's a really heavy burden placed on kids. And when our answer to all of the complicated swirl of questions in their mind is, but you're beautiful to me, I think it's fair to remember that that's great, and they want to know what the way the world perceives them, right? They want to have that conversation.
And this is a place, this is my thing. We all have our thing that we bring into talking to kids about puberty, and body image was the thing that I brought into it as someone who didn't love my body during these years. And, because I do this work, knew I needed to find my own trusted adults who I could work through this with. So besides my husband, who has no body image stuff and has no vanity and couldn't understand why it was an issue, normally he would be my trusted adult, but in this case he wasn't. And I went to a dear friend and I was like, oh my God, I'm so struggling with this. I'm listening to the thoughts in my head when I look at my own child. I'm so embarrassed that this is what I'm thinking. And she said to me, oh my God, me too. I'm like so ashamed that this is. And we were able to have the conversation about our inner monologue. So it didn't come out sideways. It didn't come out to our kids. And we didn't say the things that we would come to regret to our children. We said it to each other so we could unburden ourselves and move forward without that baggage.
That's Vanessa Kroll Bennett, a writer and a podcaster who co-wrote This Is So Awkward with Cara Natterson. Vanessa graduated from Wellesley College and has a master's degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary there. And Cara is a pediatrician and a New York Times bestselling author of other books like the Care and Keeping of You series, Guy Stuff, and Decoding Boys. Cara graduated from Harvard College and Johns Hopkins Medical School. So it's not enough for these kids that their bodies are doing all these things. It'd be hard enough, right? But it's all happening while the brain is basically reorganizing itself completely. So, when people hear the word puberty, they might think about sexual maturation. But as you said, we also got to think about what's happening above the neck. It's a huge part of it, not just because the brain is sending out all the hormones and signals and et cetera, but also because the way people are thinking is changing. There are actually chemical and electrical and physiological things happening in the brain. Cara, do you want to take just a second, not too long, but talk about what's going on upstairs for these kids that would help parents deal with the mood swings that often happen with puberty?
Yeah, and I don't usually push reading our book heavily, but for this one, I push reading our book heavily because it's a lot to digest in the 30 seconds I'm going to do it in.
Sure.
There's no way she's going to do it in 30 seconds.
Time me. But I'm on it.
Okay.
Challenge accepted.
The clock starts now.
No, don't start yet because I just want to add, but kids kids love the science, and we wrote the whole book, but really we wrote this chapter for them. Okay, ready?
Okay.
Hang on. I'm starting my timer too because
Okay.
I'm going to do it. Here we go.
No, I love this.
Okay, right? And action. The brain matures in two different ways. One way is it prunes, gets rid of too many neurons that it has starting at birth. The second way is that it myelinates. Myelination is the insulation of nerve fibers that allows messages to travel faster down those nerve fibers. And by the time a kid is in middle school, their brain is halfway myelinated. The part of their brain that is fully mature is their limbic system, which is the emotional epicenter. But the part that is not yet myelinated is their prefrontal cortex, which makes the smarter, consequential decisions. It's not a fair fight. They're going to make the decisions that feel good unless they give their brain time. It was 38 seconds.
Yeah, it was so close. That was good, though. That's good.
She's never gotten even close to that
No.
in describing it. That was very impressive.
Yes.
Very
but the
impressive.
thing you point out in the book, this is why like kids can be so impulsive or like do stuff, weird stuff that I was playing with my friend and he's like, let's get the little metal ball out of a spray paint can. I'm like, okay. So we're hitting it with a board with a nail in it and it explodes and I'm like covered in paint head to toe. Like my brain was just like, yeah, do the thing. And it's because the actual way that it's sending and receiving messages, like it's going to hit that limbic, like that gut level, like, yeah, do it. Before it's going to hit my rational, hold on, let's think about what could happen here.
And just to round out the thought, we all know kids who always make good decisions. There's like one of them in every bunch, right? What's their special sauce? What are they doing that other kids aren't? They're giving
seed oils.
Seed oils, yeah. They're giving their brains time.
Pause.
They're not, right? We use this word impulsivity a lot, and it means a lot of different things in a lot of different settings. But really what they're doing is they're letting the neurons in their brain fire, and the prefrontal cortex is there. They have one. We all have one. But they're allowing their brains to access it. Side note, it is not easy being the kid who always makes the right decision. So for parents who are listening, who are thinking, oh, I wish my kid was that way. Yes, there are a lot of reasons why it's a bit safer and healthier to have a bunch of strategies that you employ that allow you to have time. But sometimes that one good decision maker carries the burden of all of the other kids who are not letting their brains have time, and that's hard.
They have to be the police officer, or they're dealing with maybe some stress and anxiety that's helping slow things down. So yeah, tune into that kid too.
And Blair, I would say explaining the science to kids, the reason we are so, we emphasize that so particularly when it comes to brain development is that when kids make dumb decisions, they feel bad. They feel ashamed. They're worried they're going to disappoint us. And if they understand, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they made a bad decision. It doesn't mean that they're failures for life. It just meant in that moment when their friend was lighting up their limbic system, they tried to get the metal ball out of the spray paint can, for example.
It was fun.
They're still good kids. And they get another...
We didn't get the ball either. I was covered in white paint.
There's no way you got it out. I was going to say, it's like...
Well, I'm sure it blew up it flew off
It probably is like your pet ate it or something. But with all of this stuff, mood swings, brain development, if kids understand that they're a work in progress, that they're not a bad person because this part of their development is sort of taking over and not fostering great decision making or, even keeled, lovely moods, it's okay. Like we still love them and we're still here for them and we're not going to abandon them because they made a bad decision.
Yeah.
You know that line, like, you're never going to be in trouble if you just tell me what you did or don't lie, right? This is the puberty version of that line, right?
Yeah.
And it's really true. It's like we want you to make the good choice, but we know that your hardwiring doesn't make that the default mode network. So I'm going to be proud of you. Like, don't forget to acknowledge them when they do it, by the way, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be proud of you when you do the right thing, but I'm here for you when your brain takes over and you don't do the right thing.
Speaking of doing the right thing, let's talk about sex for a minute. And when it comes to sex...
Nice segue, Blair.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Overall, you say that the U.S. could improve how we're approaching sex if we were more like the Dutch on this. This is an interesting comparison. Maybe let's go at it that way, because there's so many things we could talk about in this chapter. But for lack of time, maybe just tell us some things we could improve on about how we talk about sex with kiddos.
So we can't take credit for that concept. Debbie Ruff wrote a piece for The Atlantic and then later wrote a book all about how to talk to kids about sex, including doing it the way the Dutch do.
Mm-hmm.
And
do it like the Dutch.
Do it like the Dutch. That's a song that we would have listened to in the 80s. And the point is that the Dutch begin health and sex ed with little kids when it's about consent and bodily autonomy, and they are in conversations with kids their entire lives.
Yeah, that's not even about sex. That's just about body autonomy and consent. And
it's
that's
like
where it begins. Okay.
Knowing how to respect someone else's boundaries, making sure
Yeah.
other people respect your boundaries, knowing the anatomically correct terms for your body parts so you feel agency, so you're able to advocate for yourself with an adult or a physician. And then as they grow and sex actually becomes a relevant topic, having conversations with them, not just about the mechanics or fear-based conversations with them about how to not get pregnant or how to not get STIs, but about love and connection and intimacy and respect and communication. And the Dutch do that, and their outcomes about healthier sex lives for their adolescents are like markedly different from the U.S. Lower rates of teen pregnancy, lower rates of STI, more committed, loving, partnered relationships amongst young people. Like it's not theoretically. What they do actually works.
I think a lot of people get afraid to talk about sex because they think it will lead people to want to have sex or to be more interested in sex. And I think the same goes for discussions of sexuality and gender identity. There are fears out there about like this contagion effect, that if kids find out that there's non-binary kids or that there are trans kids, they might get influenced or sucked into that. There's all these misconceptions about how people become trans, and I think contagion is one of the big ones. You do spend a chapter talking about sexuality and gender identity. Take a moment to kind of give us the big takeaway from that chapter, Cara.
Yeah, I'll start. Well, we separate them for starters. We have different chapters about sexual orientation and gender identity because they're completely separate topics that have a little bit of Venn diagram overlap, but really they're quite different. And in fact, I think the way you set that question up is a perfect framing for how those two things are different. This notion of where does education empower versus where is there contagion? When we look at sex, sexual curiosity, sexual experimentation, who you want to be intimate with, what we know, the data extraordinarily clear, is that education is not just empowering, it delays sexual experimentation, which is phenomenal to think about. It's the exact opposite of what a lot of people fear, which is if I tell them about it, they're going to do it. Actually, if I talk to them about it openly, some might do it, and they'll probably do it more safely, and others might not, or they might have the language to be able to recognize and express what they want in a sexual interaction and not find themselves in one because no one has ever been in conversation with them. A big side note here, the average age of first porn viewing in this country is 12.
Yeah.
This is a huge influence in terms of how kids learn about and think about sexual experimentation and sexual interactions.
Well, fortunately, pornography is very good at showing perfect relationships and healthy sexual expression. Luckily, boy.
Goodness, free sex ed for everyone.
And realistic body shapes and
yes.
sizes.
And what sex even looks like.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
totally.
and how many orgasms people have when having sex.
Yes, and I love the modeling of consent. It's wonderful.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, if you think about how kids are seeing sex before they even hold someone's hand, right? Like the whole thing is upside down and backwards. So this to the sexual orientation, sexual experimentation piece of the question, The gender identity piece of the question is frankly quite different. The way we approach gender and gender identity is really meeting people where they are right now, which is needing a gigantic vocabulary lesson. People of a certain age, I would say, adults who are new to this content tend to be very overwhelmed by the language. And there are a lot of terms that sound similar and mean different things. And then there's sort of a whole lot of emotion that gets lumped into the explaining of these terms, then describing these terms. And so our approach, whether it's on our podcast or in our book or on social media, is simply to define the terms so that people can be in conversation about this topic and be in conversation. You can't have discourse. You can't have an open back and forth conversation if no one knows what the words mean. And this is important.
Yeah, I think starting with books is a really good place for people who aren't familiar with gender identity issues. It's a safer place because some people might be worried about the questions they ask. Is this going to be offensive? Or, they bring preconceptions to it. And that's been helpful for me. Number one, meeting people who are just a variety of genders, actually knowing people in real life. But then also taking time to read a book or listen to some podcasts of actual trans folks or non-binary folks, listen to their voices and that's how I have been plugging into it. I've been using this show to help myself do that. So.
Yeah, we did a wonderful episode with a therapist in LA who works with kids and families who are trans or gender questioning. And we asked him about the contagion issue because it's a question we hear about all the time. And he says, kids try on all sorts of identities through this stage of life. It doesn't mean they're going to choose to go on to actually transition and make a physical transition to another gender. They're exploring, they're testing things out. And it's not their job to know exactly who they are or who they want to be, whether that's about gender or about sexuality. And that adults, we want sort of certainty, right? We want our kids to land on who they are. And yet they don't know what career they're going to have. They don't know what they're going to study. They don't know
if they're going to do what I tell them to do. So I do know. Right. My kids will do
that. Totally works all the time.
This is the funny thing about contagion, Vanessa, is try to get a kid to do something they don't want. Good luck. Especially with something this big.
I wish doing dishes was contagious.
But also,
amazing.
all kidding aside, in our conversation, he said, and he himself is a transgender person, he said, it is such a hard road to choose. You don't choose it because it's sort of fun or in vogue, because it is a lifelong decision and it is not an easy decision. And it is physically and emotionally draining and difficult and a million other things. And so he said, don't focus on what they're saying today. Just make sure they know that you love them and let them go through this process of figuring out who they are in the way they're doing in a million other ways at this age.
Because it's healthier for them if they, let's say they're thinking about it and then they decide, okay, they kind of go back or, retransition or whatever. Or if they don't, either way, you've been there with them that whole time.
Yep.
So the goal here to me isn't to okay, how can I best situate myself to control the outcome? But rather, how can I be supportive of my kid in the moment? And the best studies show that being supportive of kids that are gender nonconforming or trying to figure that out is the best way to improve and keep their emotional health strong and to help them feel supported.
And I'll just add that in the exact same way that we tell kids, give your brain time to make good decisions, we tell parents, give your kid time before you need to jump on labeling something or taking action. This is, the conversation that Vanessa referenced. One of the most important takeaways for both of us was really this notion of being supportive sometimes just means listening and understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean there are 25 things that we have to take action on right now today, or your window is closed, especially around questions about identity. There's time to have conversation. And if we all gave ourselves the privilege of time and we paced things out and we didn't need to rush it all, I think we would save ourselves a lot of heartache on so many topics.
That's Cara Natterson. She co-hosts This Is So Awkward, a really great podcast about puberty with Vanessa Kroll Bennett. And they wrote the book together, This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained. Well, we always like to conclude with regrets, challenges, and surprises. You don't have to speak to all three. You can choose kind of, what's the most interesting thing here? Is there something that you would change about the book now that it's out? What the hardest part about writing it was? Or if there's something brand new you learned, like, wow, I thought I knew a lot, but as we're writing this book, wow, was I surprised by this thing that came up. So I'll let you decide what you want to speak to.
Cara, you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
I'm writing notes right now to try to figure out. Vanessa,
Always.
you go. You go first.
So Blair, this was my first book and Cara's 10th book.
Oh, okay.
And
I only mentioned like 3 of the. Oh, there was a series.
Yeah, it's a series. It's a series, and then there's books that she wrote before the Care and Keeping. So one of us is a seasoned pro at writing these books, and one of us isn't. And we wrote this book in a summer. We wrote it in 3 months.
Wow.
Because we wanted it to come out a year before the 2024 election instead of having it come out right around the election, and that proved to be an excellent decision by us, actually by Cara. And we wrote it together. Like, we literally split the book in half. There are certain chapters where Cara had to do a lot more writing, like the contraception chapter, for example.
500-page contraception chapter.
And
cool.
So there were no regrets. It was a really joyful collaboration. Cara is a fierce editor. I like 4 verbs when 1 verb would do just fine. But it was really, really wonderful. I think what I learned from Cara, and then I'll share what I learned about the science, is that science can be written in a really funny, engaging, beautiful,
absolutely
relatable way. And she does it so incredibly. And it was
this book flows. It does.
And we edited each other throughout. We didn't just have an amazing editor, but we edited each other over and over again. One of us edited the other one a little bit more, but that's okay. And the hardest part was actually creating a united voice while still letting personality shine through. And I think we did a nice job with that. I think we kept it voicey and fun and funny and relatable, even while covering some really intense topics. The thing that I learned that I think about all the time is, how kids have like their feet seem so huge, like they're on skis, like they're not that tall, but somehow they have these like enormous feet. And I always was like, oh, isn't that funny? And their hands are like puppies, right? They're like huge.
Yeah.
So what I learned from the growth spurts chapter from Cara was that literally kids grow from the outside in. So the first things to grow are their hands and their feet, and then their appendages, their arms and their legs, and their trunk is the last place to grow. The bones there grow last. And so it's not just something I imagined. And I love thinking about it because it's like this beautiful metaphor of how kids grow as human beings. They grow from the outside in, and they're navigating with all these external changes, but also inside at the heart of them, that might be the last place to grow, the last place to mature. But when it does, it's really incredible. So that was my lovely surprise.
And that reminds me of your advice in the book to talk to kids about how like a lot of growth happens when they're sleeping. And I have definitely used that to be, I didn't tell my kids, you're going to grow bigger if you sleep. I say, look, if you like growing, maybe you want to keep growing. And if we want to grow as much as your body can, sleep is when that's happening, kiddo. We gotta hit the hay right now.
Just saying.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Mic drop.
Okay, Cara, what you got?
Okay, I wrote down my notes.
Okay,
I'm all
good.
Organized now. Okay.
She wrote a chapter. She's
right.
Chapter 1.
Well, it's been 5 minutes, so I did write a chapter. Regrets. That we didn't get to our final cover art sooner. Vanessa and I would say I really work hard to be a kind and loving person at all times, but I was not super kind and loving in the cover art process because I was so sure it mattered what was on the cover of the book. P.S. It does. And we ended up with the coolest cover ever, but it took I am not exaggerating, Blair, as long to write the book as it did to get to the cover art.
So that's a big deal because publishers control that. They're so
They gave us a
controlling of it.
lot. They were very generous and gave us a lot of say-so. And in the end, the cover,
It's great.
couple of
It's
people
bright.
have realized what the inspiration is for the cover. The cover is inspired by Nora Ephron's book. I think, is it called Things About My Neck or My
Yes.
Neck Hurts and Other Things? And it was another Random House book. And so they were kind of like willing to play with that. But it took us months to get
Months.
to that concept.
We were relentless.
What was the worst concept that you saw? Is there any, like ones
there
where you're
were
like, that's so
many.
terrible?
We
The
could be
ones
here
with
for
like
another
eight
couple of hours.
with like 8 fonts on them. I would say that was the one where Cara would text me and be like, I hate this so much. I don't even know what to do with myself.
I wanted one that looks like the carpet of a roller skating rink from when I was a kid, that's like all like
We did
neon
look
shapes.
at-
By
and
the
we
way,
did
just
look at having-
carpet from roller skating rink is the
I
best
mean,
line.
we did look at having a roller coaster on the cover because we use
Okay.
that metaphor a lot
You
on the
do,
book,
yeah.
but it
Yeah.
felt like a little bit on the nose and we
Yeah.
couldn't find a roller coaster that we liked.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, so that was my regret. We didn't get there faster, but I have no regrets about where we got. Challenges. I'd say the biggest challenge was convincing Vanessa that one normally writes 100,000 word book in 3 months. It is not normal at all.
No.
I was like such a drill sergeant, but we had it in us. And Vanessa makes it sound like I did more writing than she did. By no means.
Just
She
on
is-
contraception.
Yes. She
Yeah,
is such a
okay.
50-50 partner. And
But all I remember from that chapter is that I'm supposed to throw condoms out the window as my kids are passing by.
Right.
Is that
There you go.
your memory's
after you
correct
drop
on that?
them at school, you just throw
Yeah.
the condoms
Out the car
at them.
window.
yes, with their names written on them. Yes. So that was the challenge. Vanessa met and exceeded the challenge. And it was only when we were in the first page proof review process that she said, wait a second. Normal people don't write a book in 3 months. It's 15 months. And I was like, sorry. That was challenge. The biggest surprise, and this is going to sound so weird, but I think this is not, it's not so much a book thing as a sort of where Vanessa and I, we spend all day, every day working together. It's always surprising to me that what is in our brains is not common knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a like I just leapfrog past the 5 most important foundational concepts because I want to get to the new research and the nitty gritty. And it takes
Right.
the people around us going, stop,
Yeah.
rewind. Nobody knows the first 5 things you just blurted out in 1 second
Yeah.
flat. And go back and share all of that because we need to know. And I think that is a constant surprise to me, but it is something that I'm trying to bring to the front of my brain and not be surprised by because it's when we share the most basic information that we get the most feedback. It's wild.
Well, I think you did such a terrific job with this book. I can't recommend it enough, truly. When I heard you were willing to do the show, I was absolutely thrilled because it's such an important topic and it's the best book I've read on this. And I've read a number of them. So again, it's
Thank you.
called
Thank you.
Yes, it's called This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained. Vanessa and Cara, thank you for talking to us about it today. This has been a lot of fun.
You are a great interviewer, Blair. And as people who interview people for a livelihood, it's a pleasure to be interviewed by someone who is as thoughtful and prepared and fun as you are. So thank you for having
Thank you.
us.
Well, don't forget to rate and review the show, Vanessa, when you get a chance.
I haven't
5
rated
stars.
and reviewed my own show, but I will come and rate and review your show because it's such a pleasure.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Relationscapes. We're mapping out the stories and ideas that shape who we are and how we connect with each other. If you enjoyed this episode and you're thirsty for more, you'll love Cara and Vanessa's book and also their podcast, This Is So Awkward. And while you're looking that up, you might as well take a second to rate and review Relationscapes in Apple Podcasts or in Spotify. That's what BB8642 did. I wonder if they're related to BB8. But they gave me 5 stars. They said they love how the show gives space to multiple perspectives, and especially people who have unconventional wisdom to share. So thanks for reviewing, BB. I really appreciate that. I'm also looking for listener feedback. You can email or DM me a voice memo with your thoughts about this episode or any episode, really. Send it to blair@firesidepod.org or @_relationscapes on Instagram, and you might find yourself featured in an upcoming mini episode. Mates of State provided our theme song. Relationscapes is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm Blair Hodges, and I'll see you again soon.